Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning into our discussion today at Set Them Free. In our agenda, we have intersectional violence against women in Middle East and Balkans. I am Cemre Ülker, UN representative of the Journalists and Writers Foundation and co-founder of Set Them Free. I have Arbana Jara and Hafsa Girdap with me for today's discussion. Arbana is an Albanian investigative journalist living in the United States. And besides her notable journalism, she's also a fearless human rights defender combating various forms of violations. She's also a recipient of many recognitions, including the prestigious International Women of Courage Award from the US State Department too. And Hafsa is the executive director of Advocates of Silence Turkey, and she's also the co-founder of Set Them Free. Hafsa is also an academic at Stony Brook University, completing her PhD, conducting research on various topics, including feminism, gender-based crimes, gender equality through intersectional identities. So welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Pleasure to have you both here. Three of us, we wanted to have this interactive discussion, dialogue to mark the launch of Orange the World campaign 2022, which is United Nations Women's 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. And this year's theme is Unite, with the motto of against the pushback, we push forward. And we will all be sharing our insights about civil and political rights violations for women, their presence in maintaining sustainable peace and development, the challenges that they encounter, the status quo of violence against women in the Balkan region, political Islam, gender racism in the Middle East. So we have different topics that we will all be putting some lighting on. And just to share my brief introduction remarks with everyone, the point that really challenges me is that in our so-called modern day, we're facing an alarming increase of patriarchal, far-end oppressive regimes rising across the world. And women are on the front line combating different forms of state-led violence, facing institutionalized violations in all spheres of civil, political, economic life. And therefore, as I am a human rights expert too, I no longer take peace as an absence of war or conflicts. For me, in order to ensure that we all live by having our choice, freedom of right to choose, to style our life in the way that we desire the most, we must ensure positive peace to exist. Systems of thinking where women coming from all different backgrounds, political, religious, ethnical, cultural backgrounds can have a choice, as I mentioned, to lead their lives as they dream. And one another thing that really disturbs me, and I think this is a good occasion to raise awareness, is that in the context of political and conflict prevention, women are mostly presumed as victims. And this view not only degrades women leaders' potential, but also hinders young women and girls to equip themselves with resources and skills to take influential roles and take on high-level responsibilities in social settings, and especially in political life. I am leading so many initiatives for the empowerment of women to fully and meaningfully implement the UN's Women, Peace and Security Agenda 2. And we have many similar challenges in that area too. For women, decision makers, politicians to take the lead, they must be ensured to be provided with equal opportunities, gender-sensitive budgets in order to facilitate their mandates. And maybe before I move on with Turkey, one last thing that I wanted to underline, taking this opportunity of the Orange the World campaign, is that I would like to remind everyone listening to this discussion, and it was in UN Women's launching event too, that we raise awareness on the fact that women journalists, activists, human rights defenders, women refugees are survivors, not victims. And we must definitely embrace ourselves with this mission to learn from these champions and spread their best practices to combat violence against women. I'm going to turn to Arbana for her highlights on Balkans, but before that, as my focus area is Turkey, I want to cover that region as well, which I'm pretty sure many of our listeners have been recognizing that Turkey has been a backsliding democracy for over a decade now. And to be honest, its human rights report has never been a shining picture indeed. But given the complexity of the MENA region, hosting refugees, millions of refugees and people living across the country, belonging to different ethnic, religious groups, it's a challenging region. But the real hit really came on the forms of attacks on journalists, civil society members, ill treatment of political prisoners. Almost all steps of genocide have been reported since the 2016 failed coup attempt. Attacks on Kurdish women politicians continue at different levels. Aysel Tuğluk, HDP's member of parliament, remained in prison arbitrarily despite her critical health conditions for so long. A couple weeks ago, 11 journalists in one day were all detained. Most of them were Kurdish women journalists. And Coalition for Women in Journalism reports that Turkey is the country with the highest rate of women journalists facing different forms of violations, harassment. We have legal impediments and imprisonment at its highest levels as a threat against women human rights defenders, journalists. Recently, the most influential femicide observatory of Turkey, We Will Stop Femicide platform, is facing a closure lawsuit due to the groundless accusations that their work is against the traditionally accepted Turkish family norms and values. Just to share a couple more examples, Turkish film producer Çiğdem Mater, she is sentenced to 18 years in trial for her presence and lead at Gezi Park protests. She's specifically accused of trying to raise financials for a documentary about the Gezi Park movement, which she has never made. So she's in prison, deprived of her freedom for a production that she never took a part of. The world-renowned forensic expert, human rights defender, Şebnem Korur Fincancı, is arrested right after her call for a full-scale international investigation for Turkey's alleged use of chemical weapons. So Arbana, the picture in Turkey is really not looking good for women peacemakers, decision makers, leaders, civil society, stakeholders, journalists like yourself. Can you a little bit inform us about the status quo in the Balkans too? What are the biggest challenges? How is Turkey's influence in the region? As an investigative journalist, I know you have been through many life-threatening situations too. So I would like to hand it over to you now to listen your insights about this intersectional trend of state-led violence that women combat.
Thank you so much. And I'm honored to be with you tonight and talk about what is happening in Turkey and other places of globally. They are facing problems, and the women are the most to be attacked, as you mentioned. So unfortunately, what you've been counting all the time right now, what is happening with women in Turkey, me as a journalist, I am very much concerned about the not focus of the international media. Majority of people, especially in Balkans, they don't know who Erdogan is. He is increasing his influence in the past decade, while people don't know what he is capable of doing to his own people. While I was in Kosovo, I was one of the first among few other journalists to write about the influence coming with a specific agenda from the Recep Tayyip Erdogan. And I was in the country where Turkish ambassador asked, she wrote an open letter after my investigation. She wrote an open letter against me, and she asked from the government in my country to take actions against me. And now everyone, like, they can imagine what will happen to the journalists and what actually is happening to the journalists in Turkey. They cannot say a single word without having immediate reaction of the government and send them to jail. And as we know, we are a few journalists across the globe that we closely follow what is happening in Turkey. I do read every day on the news, but unfortunately on the major media outlets, you cannot find articles that show the reality in Turkey. And when there is no information, then there is no reaction. We have human rights organizations, as Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, and few others that report, but we do not have these cases on the media in order for people to know what is happening out there and increase their voice. Now we have the situation in Iran, when women in Iran became a symbol of resistance, coming up against mullah regime, asking for their freedom and their basic rights, while women also in other countries, as in Turkey, in Afghanistan, and many other places in Middle East are facing the same, but they are not still in the situation to come up and come against the regimes and dictatorialship as what is happening in Turkey. I've been reading a few days ago about the pregnant women that are in jail. Like almost 100 pregnant women are in jail in Turkey. And every time I meet with journalists in the United States, when I attend the conferences, when I mention some of the things, they are surprised. And this thing is very disturbing. Every time, and you can see just a random reaction, maybe some senators, but not the voice that should be in the media. As I told you, I've been covering closely. I do not live anymore in Kosovo. For almost 5 years, I'm in the United States with my 2 kids. I moved here in early 2018. I've been facing a lot of struggle from the Erdogan supporters, and I still do. So in the Balkans, he has a huge influence because he's been started investing since in early 2010. So he, not just in religious institutions, because he's been building new mosques, but he also got into a lot of major public assets. So under his hands are energy distribution, highways, a lot of factories, and having the economy, the impact in economy, then he has impact in the society. In Bosnia, he also has a huge impact, and he's very close to the political leaders in the power. In Kosovo as well, and whatever if there are journalists that have courage to write against Erdogan political and Islamic agenda, that the way he is using these countries in order to benefit himself politically, then you are going to face threats. He already have a lot of media under his hands, and they do fake news. Like, for example, myself, every time I do say something about Erdogan, they are going to produce tons of fake news against me. And I know who these people are. They openly support Erdogan's agenda right there. So for all those that are listening to us right now, yes, he's doing awful things against his own people in Turkey. He's also trying to spread his influence outside Turkey, and he has built this influence for over a decade now. And there is not a will also from Western countries. I've been waiting also from the Biden administration that he is going to be more critical toward Turkish government and president and condemn his actions. And I do not see that yet. Still, Turkey is considered as a Western ally in that part of the world, as a NATO member, what he is doing to his own people, also what he is doing to Kurds and other places. So it's just the silence of the world leaders, the silence of media. It's very disturbing. And this way, he easily he can get away of what he's doing and not seeing the reaction, not seeing the concrete actions against what he's capable of doing.
Yeah, I mean, that was a great overview of the region and Turkey's and Erdogan's influence in Balkans too. And I 100% agree on the fact that no information means no reaction. And at this point, especially with the recently passed disinformation, in quotation marks, law, journalists are under even further threat. Even citizen journalism is under threat, because at this point, anybody, any civilian with an opposition view, making posts on any social media platform can be faced with a jail time from 1 to 3 years. That's horrible. And Hafsa, maybe before we exchange some feedbacks, I wanna lastly turn to you, and then we're gonna open the platform for an interactive discussion. Let's hear more from you on your expertise on the gender-based crime state-led incidents.
Yeah, actually, you mentioned a very important, concept that I would like to also touch on, patriarchy, because we are talking about gender-based discrimination. And both you and Arbana actually talked about the authoritarian leaders who are also, conducting patriarchal oppression against women or the gender-based identities. So gender-based discrimination and violence conducted by prevalent patriarchy stand as a huge, impactful issue taking place in front of us globally, not in one place, all across the world. So first, I believe that we should define what gender-based violence discrimination is in order to understand what a broad, effective, and widespread issue it is, to understand how it affects not only women, but all the world people, actually. And gender-based discrimination or gender-based violence is an act of threat or harm directed towards an individual or individuals due to their gender identity. And it is one of the most prevalent human rights violations of our time all across the world. There are various forms of gender-based discrimination and violence, such as physical, psychological, sexual, economic, social, institutional, state-led, and state-sanctioned. And these are interacting with culture, religion, class, race, ethnicity, expanding the extent and scope of the violence. And gender-based violence, generally, violence against women specifically, is not a personal matter. It's political. Personal is political, as feminists claim, and related to all the system and society. It's not a problem of today, for sure. So while working to dismantle gender-based discrimination and violence, we need to know what dynamics and what powers we are fighting against, both in societal and political spheres, both in the academy and grassroots. This is vitally important. So in my academic work, I study the aspects and dynamics around the issue. And in my grassroots work, along with you guys, based on the knowledge production we feminist academics generate, I, along with my activist friends, colleagues, work on awareness, raising awareness, and taking action in all platforms that we could, using all means that we could. So considering Iran, Afghanistan, Turkey that you mentioned, and similar contexts, we face a rising political Islamist trend, which easily and quickly turns into authoritarianism. Compulsory hijab in Iran and violent enforcement of this hijab, leading to even deaths when resistance occurs, or Taliban's oppression against women and girl child by banning education or certain roles in the workforce or in decision-making positions, killing women, Hazara women, including Hazara women in Afghanistan, or restricting women to familial roles, positions, incarcerating women who resist oppression, and dehumanizing women when they ask for gender equality, when they call the government to reinstate the Istanbul Convention in Turkey. These are some examples from political Islamist regimes. And when we come to Europe, to the Western sphere, other Western contexts such as America, United States, an increase in far-right extremism and populism marginalizes and restrains women in general and Muslim women in particular. So given all this, I'd like to refer to an article I have just written. It's been published today. And the title of the article is Mahsa Amini, Women's Bodily Autonomy in the Context of Islamism and Far-Right Populism. And in this article, I underline the fact that debates over women's bodies, particularly those of Muslim women, have grown globally in the wake of the death of Mahsa Amini, who is a Kurdish young woman in Iran. This identity is also an important, point that we have to touch on, because she was living in Iran. She was a young woman. She was a Kurdish young woman wearing hijab, actually, and she died under custody of the Iranians' morality police after being detained for improper hijab wearing. I'm, quoting this improper according to whom. So utilizing the society's resentment with Western values or approaches, the regimes in Iran, Afghanistan, Turkey, and in other authoritarian countries, they play the political Islam card to consolidate power and justify their acts of restricting women's roles, gender roles, and they go further and act and conduct gender-based violence. Arbanna touched on this issue, and I know that you're working on Turkey's government's, establishing mosques all over Balkans to consolidate power using the religious tool, right? So again, on the other hand, the rise of far-right triggers Islamophobia in Europe. And again, referring to my recent article that I was mentioning, I'd like to emphasize that by framing Islam in Europe, in the States, in Canada, as a homogeneous totalitarian ideology which threatens Western civilization, the far right appears to abandon its traditional, radical, authoritarian attitude and move towards a more liberal, more modern, rights-based strategy. And through such a strategy, such a liberal attitude, the radical right, through an adoption of liberal values, liberal positions on many issues such as free speech, democracy, and gender equality, justify hijab ban and other religious visibilities or other oppressions, discriminations, and even violence against women. And this reminds me of the abortion versus sterilization matter in the United States. In the historical context of United States, women coming from certain ethnicities, especially from Latina countries, they were subjected to sterilization without their consents. Nowadays, the state enforces abortion ban in many parts of the country. So women's bodies have been used as tools, means, proxies to control the population and claim power. And it seems very similar to me in that sense. In my classes and speeches and writings, I always say that my body, my choice movement should stand in solidarity with women who fight for reproduction rights and also with Muslim women who want to or don't want to wear hijab.
Yes, Hafsa, I mean, these are great points. And to keep on from where you stopped, I recently, it was last month, attended an international religious forum that took place in Washington, D.C. The theme was women religious leaders and women in media, human rights defenders, women journalists, and so on. So we were working groups coming from Turkey, Iran, Syria, Lebanon. We had Afghan women, Hazara women. What really struck me is that all these groups of women were feeling alone in their causes. I mean, everybody had the same complaint. Why don't we get enough attention? Why don't we get enough media coverage on what's going on? And I mean, I am amazed at the level of courage that Iranian women are taking inside their oppressive settings, life-threatening settings. Over 300 individuals have already lost their lives. Over 50 children were killed. I mean, but somehow in this historical feminist-led revolution at this point, I'm more than glad to call a series of protests, non-stop protests. It's been over 2 months now. They have great best practices on how to capture media attention. They did not stop at any point. But maybe I'll direct this first to Arbana and then Hafsa. Please do contribute. What do we need to establish this broader umbrella solidarity for women's rights? Because as I listened, women coming from Syria, from Lebanon, Uyghur women, we all talk about the same issues indeed. Patriarchal, far-end regimes, state-led violence, no place in media to cover women's rights. Even the media literacy is horrible. Even when we have coverage on femicide, domestic violence, women are still put as stakeholders, as focal people, as a reason leading to the violence. What do we miss? How are we going to come together on this global fight?
Well, we have seen the world solidarity with women in Iran. So the good thing is that there was a reaction from all over the world, everywhere in support. But it is much easier from our commodity in Western countries to sit and say whatever we want to say. And you know, in Turkey, what happened if someone just raises a voice and against the dictatorship regime or in other countries. In Afghanistan, we have seen the withdrawal of the United States troops, but women were left there without no support. So we should, moral support, is it enough? No. We need political action. Let me tell you just as an example. I come from Kosovo, where we have our president is a woman, Gyosa Osmani, and we have quota fulfilled in the institutions, and we have all the laws. So despite what looks like outstanding progress toward gender equality and the strengthening of women's rights in Kosovo, the reality is that the women face so many struggles. Like only 17% of women have, like only on 17 on property. Like can you imagine how many problems they are facing? The stereotypes that they reduce the ability of women to be equal member of the family and society in terms of economists. But I was going over and I wanted to know more about how it started in Turkey. And I've been reading some statements from Erdogan. In 2014, he said, you cannot put women and men on an equal footing. So they're not equal. They are not equal. Then in 2016, he said women who choose career over motherhood, so he was not considering them like the real woman, that if you choose between, like he was saying that these are half persons. So you have a leader who sees you as a half person just because you want to be integrated, you want to work, you want to have your career, you want to go to school. So everything starts in the politics, everything. So these are the institutional way which are causing women to suffer. How can we affect the change? From my point of view, is just political action. The UN member states should raise their voice. They cannot just watch in silence. They cannot say, you know what, Turkey right now is dealing with Syrians, and we have other political problems with Russia and Ukraine, and we need Erdogan right now, while thousands of people are suffering behind the bars. So the thing is that politically, the Western countries, which were supposed to raise their voice in support of women, I do not see that. So we can organize conferences. We can write every day. We do support all the causes, but at the end of the day, do we see change? No. Do we see any change in Turkey? Every day, whoever speaks against Erdogan, they are going to be sent to jail. Do we see any change with women in Afghanistan? No. Can we change the mindset of Taliban regime? No. But we can, yes, there are other ways to pressure governments, to pressure regimes with sanctions, with other political decision. And unfortunately, we do not see this coming from Western countries, because at the end of the day, there are other politic thing, other interests, then they are just watching in silence and not reacting. So I'm saying that you can legally, you can have all the laws as it is in Kosovo, but on the ground, you have women suffering. In all the conflict zones, the women and the children are the most being attacked as suffering. See what is happening in Ukraine and in another conflict zone. So what I'm trying to say is that we should, media, civil society, we should pressure leaders. We should pressure UN member states. Otherwise, we have decades of women suffering under this regime. Nothing has changed. What has been changed in Afghanistan? Now in Iran, see what is happening. We still have the courageous women and also men supporting them against the mullah regime. But what mullah regime is doing to the protesters is the message sent to other countries. If they are going to come up and organize and protest against their government, see what might happen to them as well. So, as I said, Iranian women are a symbol of courage. Other women in other countries are facing the same, but they do not have the circumstances to come up against. We need, from this position that we are right now, the three of us are living in the United States, and there are thousands of organizations. I think that we are doing the wrong way to pressure and have the change. We should use different routes to pressure leaders. We should ask from Biden administration and the conferences, do you know that this many women with children are behind the bars? Of course, they have information why they are not reacting. So I think that I will use this way to pressure and probably see change. Otherwise, protests we will have reaction, we will have reports, we will have some statements, but in the ground, I'm not seeing any positive change in this regard.
Well, I do agree with you on the point that political will, that is my favorite human rights term as well. It's the key, because we have enough human rights conventions, enough intergovernmental bodies, treaty bodies, working groups at UN too, tens of offices monitoring, reporting on systemic state-led different forms of violations, not for Turkey only or Iran only, across the world. Atrocities are taking place on an increasingly pace, unfortunately, in every part of the world. But at the end of the day, as you mentioned, UN is doing its partial work. I'm going to say time to time there is many political, economical obstacles too, but I know that working in a diplomatic setting, at the end of the day, every member state is a sovereign country with their own rule of law. How much they apply is a question mark. I leave it there, but they are independent governmental entities. So therefore, we have to find, just like you say, a way to push for a political incentive to implement these human rights laws and norms. Hafsa, anything else you want to add on?
Actually, Arbana, put it in a great way. I agree with her in terms of political action, consistent political action. On top of what she said, I also would like to add that, before taking action as an instructor, educationalist, or also activist, as always, I would like to underline that education is very important. Okay, we have to take a political action. Who, where, how? These are important questions that we have to address and answer and help people, because without knowing our rights and without, knowing where to ask for our rights, we would miss the point, actually. So being aware of most significant barriers in the political sphere, in the corporate sphere, or in grassroots levels, we have to prioritize our actions and following a process accordingly. So I think we have to educate and urge our leaders from bottom level to the top, in terms of administrations and community leaders and decision makers from the lowest level to the highest. So we could and should urge our fathers, our community leaders, religious leaders, men and women, all genders. So managers, directors in the businesses, politicians in the very local level to the very, high level in the Congress, in the state or United Nations, ECHR. So to ensure that women's rights, gender-based rights are respected, preserved, and they are not discriminated. And we also should make sure that the perpetrators of violence are brought into the justice in the state level or also in the international level. So we have to know where to go, how to go, with what to go. In terms of that, I know that United Nations, UN Women's has great educational packs and kits in order to use in different platforms. Education is very important to be aware, and then taking action in the political level is the correct answer, I believe.
Yes, Hafsa, you're right when you mentioned consistency. For example, last year, if I'm not wrong, the Biden administration refused to invite Erdogan in the Democracy Summit, right? Yeah. So this was an example, but they should be consistent.
Yes.
Other NATO members should be consistent. So that's why on the other side, when I mentioned major media outlets should cover this way, they are going to raise awareness of many other groups, not just society, but also thousands of other organizations and congresses and senators in order to have the reaction of the larger group on what is coming. Like if Erdogan comes for visit and people don't know what is going on. We had his wife getting an award in New York from a Turkish organization. So, and when you report that this ruthless dictator is killing his own people, it might have different impact. It might have different reaction. So they are the media, and I'm talking not, we have a lot of media that are reporting. That's why journalists are in jail, because they are reporting and they are raising their voice. But some of the top media, they are silent when it comes to Turkey and many other countries where women are suffering.
I think at that point, Cemre, this is why I'm talking about education. As you know, you are a journalist. Cemre and I are working on human rights issues in the grassroots and in the academy. So, when, Syria or in Afghanistan, it's much more drawing attention from the international, public, but Turkey is in between. The reason is that there is no armed conflict here. So we have to address that, international conventions, documents, agreements are not anymore sufficient to address this problem. So we have to know that too, right, Cemre?
Yeah, of course. As I mentioned, UN has some frameworks and steps of civil, political, social actions that takes us to the definition of genocide. It doesn't happen overnight. It's a long-term process. And even before 2016 too, we had the rule of law crackdown.
Yeah.
Media was under pressure even pre-2016, but the real hit came with this so-called failed incident.
Yeah.
But at this point, I also, before we wrap up the discussion, that is very interesting that being political is seen as a bad thing, especially within our traditional cultures, because we see corrupt leaders all the time. Even for AKP, people used to say they steal, but they work. Well, the discussion ends there. We cannot take it any further because human rights is a political issue, and femicide is a political issue. Domestic violence is a political issue because we have laws already in presence to protect women from their intimate partners, to make sure that they have safety in their own houses. But do the forces imply them in a proper way? No. So, and what is the answer there? Political will. Take an action.
Cemre, there is something tragic and also funny, so I can say that tragicomic. I have accounts on Twitter and Instagram, and the number of my followers is around 6,000, and I am receiving a lot of messages, direct messages, and saying that we are following you. but without following you, because your page is a bit political. So we don't want to, draw attention to ourselves. So I always say that, okay, I'm talking about human rights matters. In Turkey, it's a persecution. Across the world, the things that women are undergoing, it's oppression or discrimination or violence. Who is doing that? Politicians, our leaders, and there is impunity. So of course it's political. Of course we have to take political action. What are you saying? And I don't know. Yeah.
Interesting. What is your thought, Arbana?
So it's the way he has managed to build and increase the support of the societies outside Turkey, for example, in Balkans.
Mm-hmm.
He has invested. When the flood or something happened in Albania, he's going to send millions to build house. He's going to send computers within the school. So he's using the poverty, the extreme poverty. He's using this political crisis. So when Kosovo and Serbia are in the political crisis, and Erdogan from time to time come up with a statement in support of Albanians in order to them to have the influence within our society. And when me as a journalist, when I come up and investigate and say, see, this person is dangerous, then I get the reaction of thousands of people that actually received help from him. And they don't know that he is going to give charity, but behind that, his own Islamic dangerous agenda.
Yes.
So this is what they don't understand. And this way, if I and a few other journalists have courage to come up and say the truth with facts, because we investigate, and then from these his supporters, we are going to be portrayed as Islamophobes. You know why? Because Erdogan uses religion not to be questioned. So he comes in the rally and he speaks in front of thousands of people holding Quran, which means you cannot question what I'm doing because he's using religion.
Yeah.
And if in a country which Erdogan has some investments, you are going to get a lot of reaction. You are going to be targeted as a journalist, as a female. Now, I can imagine how hard it is for my colleagues in Turkey to come up and say the truth. So this is the way he knows exactly what he's doing. And this happened within many years. So this started from over 10 years ago. And now you have grown up kids that went to the different events that Turkish embassy was organizing. Now they are 25, 26 years old, and they are convinced that Erdogan is a good person. They see Erdogan as an idol because Erdogan was...
They haven't seen any other leader.
Yeah. And the thing is that now media do not report on what he is doing in Turkey, and they don't know. And if I come up and say, listen, see, he's sending in jail his own people, they are going to be surprised. No way, because they don't have information. As Hafsa is saying, they are not informed and they are not educated. So it's more complicated than it looks. So it is more complicated. Then you have most popular leaders in the Balkans very close to Erdogan. And as a popular leader, you have a mass that follow you, like millions of people. And then how you are going to convince them that Erdogan is dangerous? And Erdogan is using Balkans to threaten EU for his own political agenda. I remember in 2018, Austria was the first country to ban him from organizing election campaign. And he chose Bosnia to come and address to his potential voters in Europe because Austria didn't allow him. So he uses this region, Kosovo, Albania. He sends a lot of businesses in Serbia, even though Serbs are Orthodox, they are not Muslims. He's using every way he can to increase his influence. So, and how For Albanians, for example, how can you trust Erdogan when Erdogan sends millions of investment in Serbia and Albanians were still having problems with Serbia. We were in war with Serbia. Serbia committed genocide against Albanians. And how can Erdogan be good to Albanians when he is sending investments in Serbia and he is building mosques in Kosovo for his own interests? So this is what I've been trying to tell to my own people, to my country, through my articles. But now, these days, you have less. You can barely see an article and read an article in Kosovo or Albania about the Erdogan influence.
You're right, yeah.
Unfortunately.
Well, after systemic series of investments in all forms, it's even more challenging. But not only for Turkey. I think this misinterpretation and manipulation of cultural norms, religious norms, is the number one tool that states have to manipulate their crowds, to oppress dissident journalists, human rights experts, any critical citizen at this point. Well, thank you so much to both of you. That was a great pleasure and honor, as always, to share this joint platform with you. We have spoken about various issues on how mainstream media is the number one to go for oppressive regimes, to start off series of systematic state-led violence against all parts of the society, but in particularly women combating crimes against humanity on the front line as human rights activists, journalists. We spoke on increasing numbers of political prisoners in Turkey who are raising their critical opinion against what's going on, demanding their own political, civil, social freedom. We spoke about the need to establish a global solidarity to join our best practices, to call for action as we've coming from different countries, coming from different religious cultures, combat the same patriarchal problem, to stand against state-led violence. We also spoke on how brave Iranian women and girls, a TikTok generation, is really making a history at our day-to-day, and I'm pretty sure we will see the positive results as soon as UN is taking the lead to intervene. The Human Rights Council is convening in Geneva. I really hope to see some action-oriented agenda items coming from those intergovernmental meetings too. And we, at the end of the day, we underline that political will is the answer to come up with long-term solutions to fight against all injustices, to end impunity foremost against atrocious crimes taking place across the world. Thank you so much once again, and I look forward to hosting you in future occasions.
Yeah, it was a